Okay, so hang on, let me get this to go full screen. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to do validity, and sorry about this being posted late. I've had a lot of really bad technical problems. So yeah, sorry about that. So validity. Are you measuring what you intend to measure? And validity requires reliability. It can't be valid unless it is also reliable. So we talked about this measure of alcohol abuse. So we talked about, is this really measuring alcohol abuse? Because if you have 8 or more drinks, if you have 8 drinks in a week, that's about 1 drink per day, 2 drinks on one of the days. So, I mean, this is not necessarily measuring alcohol abuse. Now, maybe if the person drank all 8 at the same time, that would be alcohol abuse, but we have no way of telling that. So this may not be measuring alcohol abuse the way we want to. So therefore, it's not necessarily a valid measure. So we're going to talk about these 4 main types: face validity, content validity, construct validity, and criterion validity, with the subtypes for construct and criterion. So we have face validity. So do the items appear to measure what people say the scale is measuring? And this is measured with experts looking at the scale and saying if it's a good measure of what you're trying to measure or not. So remember, I looked at this and I pretended to be an expert, and I said, this looks like a good measure of anxiety. So that would be an example of face validity. So content validity. This is, does this measure cover everything that is supposed to be covered with the construct? So like we had this example, anxiety, and if it's missing some of these parts, it may not be as valid as it otherwise would be. So when measuring a construct, it's important to take in everything that it encompasses the construct. And this content validity can be assessed in a couple different ways. It can be assessed by with face validity, talking to an expert and asking. But what distinguishes it from face validity is that you can also turn to the literature that's been written and see what people say is important in including in your item. Another distinction with content validity versus face validity is content validity has a focus on capturing everything that is supposed to be captured in the measure. So construct validity. How well does the measure as a whole assess the underlying theoretical construct? So we have convergent validity. Do multiple measures of the same and or related constructs hang together or operate in consistent ways? So let's go into that a little bit. So we have the example of a new depression scale and an already existing depression scale. And you want to see if your new scale is valid. Therefore, you correlate it with an already existing scale. Now, the idea is that the existing scale has been found to be valid. Therefore, if your new depression scale is correlated with the old one, then the new one should also be valid. And it should be a positive correlation, not a negative or null correlation. So here's another example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same construct. So depression and anxiety, they are positively related. So if you have a scale of depression and a scale of anxiety, if they're related, then you know that they're operating the way that they should. If they're not related, if they're related if they have a positive relationship, then they're operating the way they should. But if it has a null relationship, or meaning no relationship, or if it's a negative relationship, then there's something wrong with one of your measures. They aren't converging the way they're supposed to. So if you had depression go up and as anxiety goes down, then one of your measures has got some funky stuff going on, because they should converge in that they are positively correlated. Depression goes up as anxiety goes up, theoretically. And if your data doesn't match that, then there's a problem. Okay, divergent validity. Can the measure differentiate between groups we would expect to score differently? So we have the new depression scale again, and then an existing self-esteem scale. Now, we would theoretically expect these two to be negative related. As depression goes up, anxiety goes down. Or as self-esteem, excuse me, I meant that, not anxiety. As depression goes up, self-esteem goes down. Or the opposite, as self-esteem goes up, depression goes down. So they are diverging, they are moving away from each other. And the idea is that the self-esteem scale already existed and is validated. Therefore, if your new depression scale is valid, then theoretically it is supposed to be negatively associated with the self-esteem scale. If it is negatively associated with the self-esteem scale that's already been found to be valid, then your depression scale, your new depression scale, is probably valid as well. So yeah. And with divergent validity, it can either be null, the correlation, meaning no correlation, or it can be negative correlation. Either one of those counts as divergent validity. And there's another approach to divergent validity. So, and that's using with one scale. So those who are high in self-esteem would score highly on the scale, while those who are low should score low. The single scale should be able to distinguish between the two groups. So remember how we talked about how a variable varies. There are multiple options that participants can select. And so if your measure of self-esteem is valid, then those who have high self-esteem should be selecting high scores for your measure, while those who have low self-esteem should be selecting low numbers for their score. So if your scale can't tell the difference between, if your scale of self-esteem can't tell who has high self-esteem and who has low self-esteem, then it's not a very good scale. Okay, criterion. How does the measure relate to an already known standard of performance? So you have concurrent. So this is like if an employer has a bunch of employees and he decides he wants to come up with an aptitude test. So he creates one and gives it to his employees, and he looks at the results. Now he's known these employees for a while, and so he will know if the results match up to real life or not. Now let's say that the results that he got from his employees did match up with real life. He's then shown that the scale is valid, and he can then go take the scale and give it to people who are applying to measure their aptitude. And he can know that the scores of these applicants will be valid because he validated the measure with his current employees. And predictive validity. So that's like the applicant took the aptitude test and they were selected for the job. And then years down the line, they want to see how that aptitude test years ago predicts the employee's current performance years later. And you would hope that those two things would be correlated, the aptitude test and the future performance of the employee. Now, do not get the predictive validity mixed up with test-retest validity. So predictive validity is still concerned with, is this test actually measuring the employee's aptitude? Even if it is in the future, is is it accurately describing the participants' performance years later? Whereas test-retest reliability is just concerned about getting the same or similar score. It may not even be the right score, but if you're getting the same or similar score, then it's still test-retest reliability. Okay, we're going to stop there.